Shalom, guys. Welcome back to another episode here at YASHAV Youth Ministries with YASHAV. Thank you again for being there. So we're back. We're going to continue our studies of the book of Exodus, or Shemot, names. And we have been following the people of Israel, Moses as the chosen messenger and representative to carry out this mission of redeeming and delivering the people of Israel to the land and manifesting God's faithfulness to the promises given to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And we are in one of the most important Torah portions, the giving of the commandments, and it started with Torah portion Yitro. Okay, and so we will begin. It'll be a long video, very informative. So I'll ask you to be patient. Resources that I will be using will be JPS, Torah commentary. I also have if you excuse me, the Sunday Event Illustrated Bible commentary. So a couple of resources that we've been using, and it's going to help us understand a little bit of what we'll be encountering in the near future. There's another one, Who Shall Ascend by Michael Morales. Who shall ascend to the mountain of the Lord? So there's a lot. Okay, we're going to start studying a couple of things, a couple of details here and there. But before we get started, we will do the Torah blessing. Okay? Baruch atah Adonai HaMevorah, Baruch Adonai HaMevorah le'olam va'ed, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bahar banu mikol ha'amim, v'natan lanu et torato, Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah. Blessed Adonai who is blessed, blessed Adonai who is blessed, now and forever. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of the universe, who has chosen us from among the peoples and given us the Torah. Blessed are you, Adonai, giver of the Torah. Amen. So like I said, this week's Torah portion is Torah portion Jethro. Okay? And this is found in Exodus 18, verse 1 through Exodus 20, verse 26. And the Haftarah, the prophet's portion, is Isaiah 6, verse 1 through 7. Isaiah 6, verses 1 through chapter 7, verse 6. And Isaiah 9, verses 6 through 7. And the Haftarah, or the Brit Hadashah portion, or the New Testament portion, is Matthew chapter 5, verses 8 through 20. In our Torah portion for this week, Moses' father-in-law, Jethro, had heard of Israel's deliverance from Egypt and went to the land of Rephidim to meet with Moses. There Moses recounted the great story of the Exodus, telling him all that the Lord had done to the Pharaoh for Israel's sake. Jethro rejoiced, blessed the Lord, and offered sacrifices which were communally eaten with Moses' brother Aaron and the 70 elders of Israel. After this celebration, Jethro observed how Moses sat every day to judge the people, from morning to evening, and expressed concern that his son-in-law was taking on too much responsibility. Jethro then wisely advised his son-in-law to appoint the hierarchy of magistrates and judges to help him govern the people, thereby freeing Moses to be a more effective intercessor before the Lord. Jethro's wise counsel helped implement the system of justice that later became the basis of the Jewish social law, also called the Beit Din or the Sanhedrin. This is the introduction. We're introduced to the reuniting of Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, and his wife and children. And he gives them an account of what has happened. And then, Jethro has a meal with him and his brother Aaron and the elders. And it's interesting because the elders and the judges and all these magistrates that are chosen, or that he is advises Moses to choose, are to help Moses teach the law, but the law hasn't been given yet, the Torah. And so it is a very interesting study that we can do later on how obviously this chapter, this passage, is not necessarily a continuation of the line of time that we have been following. Is more something that has happened already and is introduced to us before we receive the commandments. And so is an interesting thing that is presented. And so the Torah portion starts off this way. Vayishma Yitro Kohen Midian Choten Moshe et Chal Asher Atza Elohim למשה ולישראל עמו כי הוציא אדוני את ישראל ממצרים. And in English, it says the following. Now Jethro, the priest of Midian and father-in-law of Moses, heard of everything God had done for Moses and for his people Israel, and how the Lord had brought Israel out of Egypt. After Moses had sent away his wife Zipporah, his father-in-law Jethro received her and her 2 sons. One son was named Gershon, and for Moses said, have become a foreigner in a foreign land. And the other was named Eliezer, for he said, my father God was my helper. He saved me from the sword of Pharaoh. Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, together with his Moses' sons and wife, came to him in the wilderness, where he was camped near the mountain of God. Jethro has sent word to him, I, your father-in-law Jethro, am coming to you with your wife and your 2 sons. So Moses went to meet his father-in-law and bowed down and kissed him. All right, so there's a certain reverence and respect. They greeted each other and then went into the tent. Moses told his father-in-law about everything the Lord had done to Pharaoh and the Egyptians of Israel for Israel's sake, and about all the hardships they had met along the way, and how the Lord saved them. Now, the next day Moses took his seat to serve as judge for the people, and they stood around him from morning till evening. When his father-in-law saw all that Moses was doing for the people, he said, what is this that you're doing for the people? Why do you sit alone as judge while all these people stand around you from morning till evening? Moses answered him, because the people come to me to seek God's will. Whenever they have a dispute, it is brought to me, and it is decided between the parties and informed of God's decrees and instructions. Moses' father-in-law replied, what you're doing is not good. You and these people who come to you will only wear yourself out. The work is too heavy for you. You cannot handle it alone. Listen now to me, and I will give you some advice. And may God be with you. You must be the people's representative before God and bring their disputes to him. Teach them his decrees and instructions, and show them the way that they are to live and how they are to behave. But the select capable men from all the people, men who fear God, trustworthy men who hate dishonest gain, and appoint them as officials over thousands and hundreds and fifties and tens. And so Moses is at the mountain, right? And this is what we're about to see, what we're about to experience, okay? And it is Moses at the presence of God. And what's happening here is after this, right? And it's understood that is after the giving of the commandments and all that. And so Jethro is advising Moses that he's going to wear himself out trying to explain this and judge each case individually. And there's many people, many families, and so many cases. And so he gives them a wise counsel on installing leaders that will help him relieve the load, okay? And so it teaches, to an extent, a wise advice that was given by Moses' father-in-law, which also teaches us or lets us know a little backstory of where Moses was learning and how Moses was being restructured when he was at his father-in-law's house, and the respect that he has for him because of that wisdom. And so it was very important, and it's very important for the people of Israel and their culture, and understanding that from this point on there is a judicial system and structure that is implemented that we can study later on. And so they're in front of the mountain, and here God is going to establish holiness. And so It's important because we will discuss the meaning of this, but as a simplification, we see how Moses, as God's representative, delivers them from Egypt. Gods of Egypt destroyed. Pharaoh destroyed. Right, the representation of the deity on earth in Egypt is destroyed. God parts the seas in front of Baal Zephon, destroying the Leviathan. Right, this fear of death that was on the waters, and God splits it open, lets the people walk on dry ground, and then destroys their enemies. And so the people are in front of this mountain. They have gone through a couple ups and downs of complaining, but God now is going to give them the blueprint of how they are going to carry God's presence and image morally. Okay, so they're in the mountain, and it is believed that there's parameters that are set so that the people do not cross, and the levels of holiness and purity are going to start to come into play. So in Exodus 19, it says, on the first day of the third month, after the Israelites left Egypt, on the very day they came to the desert of Sinai. After they set out from Rephidim, they entered the desert of Sinai, and Israel camped there in the desert in front of the mountain. Then Moses went up to God, and the Lord called him from the mountain and said, this is what you are to say to the descendants of Jacob, and what you are to tell the people of Israel. You yourself have seen what I did to Egypt, and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all the nations you will be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words you are to speak to the Israelites. And so this is the beginning and the introduction of what does the commandments represent. And the commandments are the representation of us accepting God's purpose. And by us from the heart accepting God's purpose and embracing his kingdom, he makes us a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Now, obviously, there's more to this later on, but in the case where we are right now, in the mountain where God is about to deliver the Torah and the commandments, he says, you guys will be a kingdom of priests, a holy nation, separated, consecrated. Okay? So this is what Moses is supposed to tell the people. The Lord descended to the top of the mountain, okay, at Sinai, and called Moses to the top of the mountain. So Moses went up, and the Lord said to him, go down and warn the people so they do not force their way through and see the Lord, and many of them perish. Even the priests who approach the Lord must consecrate themselves, or the Lord will break out against them. And so here's where the whole levels of holiness are starting to be established, and how Moses is able to go, obviously, into the presence, the priests to a certain level, and the people to a certain level. And this is to establish order, structure, and understanding that God wants to have a relationship with us, but that we need to start progressively elevating ourselves. And the only way that we were able to do that is understanding those parameters that he establishes, and now obviously the commandments that he will be giving us. And so the covenant at Sinai, the arrival at Sinai inaugurates the culminating stage in the process of forging Israel's nationality and national identity and spiritual destiny. The shared experience of the bondage and liberation are to be supplemented and given ultimate meaning by a great communal encounter with their deity. So after all this, now they're going to have a direct communication with the God. Because remember, all this that has been happening has been Moses leading them, representing them, and representing the deity in front of Pharaoh. But now they're going to have a direct meeting with God, and he's going to speak to them. So henceforth, Israel is to be a people inextricably bound to God by a covenantal relationship. Okay, and so this makes it legal. The Hebrew term for a covenant is the biblical word berit. The Christian designation of sacred scripture as testament reflects this understanding of the covenant concept as the controlling idea of biblical faith. Testament is a now largely obsolete word for the written record of a contract. Sorry, not compact. And so, in the ancient world, relationships between individuals as well as between states were ordered and regulated by means of covenants or treaties. Numerous examples of such instruments of international diplomacy have survived, deriving from the various parts of the ancient Near East. These divided into two basic categories: a parity treaty, where the contracting parties negotiate as equals, and suzerain vassal treaty, where one party transparently imposes its will on the other. A study of these documents, particularly those of the latter type, leaves no doubt as to the influence of the ancient Near East treaty pattern and the external, formal, and literal aspect. The biblical brit, that affinities are to be expected. In order for the brit or berit to be intelligible to the Israelites, it made sense to structure it according to the accepted patterns of the then universally recognized legal instruments. So what this is saying is there was a ancient Near Eastern structure that was done for communities, and they had their deities, they had their gods, they had their commands and moral rules and documents. And so God is saying, okay, we're gonna do something similar or something like them, but I will be stipulating an ideal contract in where me and you have a relationship, okay? And so the Decalogue and its content are, however, in a class by themselves. The idea of a covenantal relationship between God and an entire people is unparalleled. Similarly unique is the setting of the covenant in a narrative context, okay? It is the latter that imparts to the covenant its meaning and significance. The covenant would be devalued where the link between them to be served, okay, or severed. Sorry. Another major and original feature is the manner in which the content of the brit embraces the internal life of the vassal by regulating preoccupation with social affairs is beyond the scope and intent of all other ancient treaties, whose sole concern is with the external affairs of the vassal. And so what it's saying here is this treaty is internally dedicated to not only maintaining your relationship with God, but maintaining yourself pure, because God sees us as a value, right? Because we are His creation, created in His image, compared to other treaties where the vassal, in this case us, right? Because there's a suzerain and a vassal, okay? And so the suzerain is the deity or the powerful one, and the vassal is the servant. And in ancient communities, the vassal is there to serve and has no meaning of importance. The individual itself, the individual is there to supply what the deity needs and sustain the deity, okay? So in uniqueness, the Decalogue, notwithstanding it is undeniable that many of its provisions are closely paralleled. The uniqueness of the Decalogue, notwithstanding, is undeniable that many of the provisions are closely parallel in the wisdom and ethical literature of the ancient world. Several other ancient law collections rest upon the foundations of ethical and moral principles, of justice and morality. Sins of a moral and ethical nature, such as bearing false witness, disrespect of parents, theft, adultery, and murder, are all listed in the magic text from Mesopotamia, known as the Shurpu series. The Declaration of Innocence, located in chapter 12 of the Egyptian Book of the Dead, is formulated in negative terms and clearly testifies to the reality of positive moral ideals. It is obvious that the great civilizations of the Nile and Mesopotamia valleys could not have functioned without a commitment to a set of ethical ideals and principles of morality. And it's just something that I highlighted in a teaching recently, that these nations, even though that through the Bible they are against what God designed, in their communities they have moral rules and principles and laws that they adhere themselves to, and that they by their own faith hold themselves to, right? And so it's a very cultural conflict when Adonai comes and establishes something different with Israel, and how Adonai is trying to, with Israel, basically purify the land and the earth. And they're called to be that testimony, that representation of the true order and the true law and the true moral code. Okay, but before it is done throughout the world, Israel is supposed to represent it and portray it so that the nations can see. And when they compare, they see how not only their moral codes are beneficial to the individual, but that also brings a direct relationship with the deity. Okay. And there's a lot of mistakes in my PowerPoint. I apologize. So it says, what is revolutionary about the Decalogues in Israel, and not so much its content as the way in which these norms conduct are regarded as being expressions of divine will, eternally binding on the individual and on society as a whole. Both are equally answerable to the deity, which was not the case in pagan cultures. Okay. Another extraordinary Israelite innovation is the amalgamation of what in modern times would be classified separately as religious and secular or social obligations. This distinction is meaningless in a biblical context, whereas both categories alike are accepted as emanating from God. Social concern, therefore, is rooted in a religious conscience. Still, another outstanding feature of the Decalogue is the apodictic nature of its stipulations. This simple and absolute positive and negative imperatives are devoid on qualifications and mostly presented without accompanying penalties or threats of punishment. The idea is that the covenant is a self-enforcing document. All right, so you receive the document and you read the document and you decide to accept this on yourself. The motivation for fulfilling its stipulations is not to be fear of retribution, but the desire to conform to the divine will, to reinforce by the spiritual discipline and moral fiber of the individual. So the idea of the covenant is to give you a divine revelation of the design that God intends or intended to establish since the moment of creation. And the moment that you receive this document, that to us it is rules and norms, etc., but to God it is the way in which we walk that will manifest not only His presence but the holiness, our consecration for the service and representation of Him. And the idea of receiving it is not so that we can have it as a burden, but that we write it in our hearts with a desire to manifest it out of love for His deliverance and protection from the Egyptians. Okay, so the Ten Commandments or Decalogues. Okay, now this is a definition. What Decalogues? I kept saying Decalogues, and this is something that when I started studying, I learned, and when I was reading books, I was confused of why it was used this way. But legally, and in a lot of studies, you hear Decalogues, right? And so it comes from the Greek hoi dekalogi, the Ten Commandments, or Decalogues, Biblos, books of the Ten Commandments. It's French and Latin, Decalogues. Late Middle English via French, and Ecclesiastical Latin from Greek, Decalogues, and so on and so forth. Okay, so Decalogues. The title, the present chapter carries no designation for this document. The popular English title, the Ten Commandments, is derived from the traditional, although inaccurate, English rendering of the Hebrew phrase Azeret Chadevarim that appears in Exodus 34:28. And in Deuteronomy 4:13 and 10:4. In fact, the term commandment, mishpat or mitzvot, is not employed in the present context. The Hebrew means rather the 10 words, which the Jews in ancient Alexandria and Egypt translated literally into a Greek as Decalogue. This gave rise to the more accurate English alternative, Decalogue. In fact, traditional exegetes derive 13, not 10 commandments from the Decalogues, as for instance in the Sefer HaHinuk 13th, right? So that's interesting. Okay. The tablets of stone several biblical texts testify to the inscribing of Decalogue on 2 stone tablets. The practice of recording covenant of tablets was well rooted in biblical world, as well as was also the custom of mentioned in Exodus 3:16 of depositing the document in a sanctuary. A treaty between the Hittite king Shupilulimas and the king Mitawatsa of Mitan in Upper Mesopotamia noted that catch of the contracting parties deposited a copy in his respective temple before the shrine of the deity. Similarly, when Ramses of Egypt and the Hittite king Hattusilis concluded a treaty around the year 1269 AC. The clauses were inscribed on the tablets of silver, which were placed at the feet of the god. So, all this information is to help us understand the importance of the details of why is it in stone, why is it preserved, right? All of these are legal matters that are established, right? More than spiritual applications, there's a legality to what we are going to start reading from now on, right? And it is binding. And so the confession of faith, saying, I believe in the God of Israel and all that, and I accept the commandments and all this is very important, but it's legal binding, okay? And God takes your word very seriously. So Exodus 1 verse 1 through 11 says, and God spoke all these words, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, a land of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make yourself any image in form of anything in heaven, above on earth, beneath in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of their parents to the third and fourth generations of those who hate me, but showing love to the 1,000th generation of those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not hold anyone guiltless who misuses his name. Remember the Shabbat day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but on the 7th day is a Shabbat to the Lord your God. On it you shall do no work, neither you nor your son, your daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, and the sea and all that is in them. But he rested on the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Shabbat day and made it holy. Honor your father and your mother, so that you may live long in the land the Lord your God has given you. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. Right. So here we start seeing that God is explaining to us each command. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, the belongings of your neighbor. Thunder and lightning, when the people saw the thunder and lightning and heard the trumpet and saw the mountain in smoke, they trembled with fear. They stayed at the distance and said to Moses, speak to us yourself and we would listen, but do not have God speak to us or we will die. Moses said to the people, do not be afraid. God has come to test you, so that the fear of God will be with you, to keep you from sinning. The people remained at the distance while Moses approached the thick darkness where God was. And so this is what exited Egypt, right? And this is something that I was showing the youth last week. And so this is the picture of what we see that exits Egypt, right? And after God destroys all their deities in Egypt and their cosmology and cosmogony and the structure of their faith, these people, it's recorded as 600,000 men left. And I'm pretty sure all these men have families. So you can say a rough estimate of 3 million people probably had left Egypt. And so they encounter this in last week's Torah portion. And it's very impressive to see something. And obviously, I'm not saying that this is exactly how it was, but it's close enough, right? You leave Egypt and you are standing in front of the sea of reeds, or the Red Sea, and you have Moses and the staff. You have seen what God has done through Moses, but you also have that pillar in front of you guiding you. and then this pillar goes behind you, and then this is coming. So you're stuck in between the sea, the mountain of Baal Zephon, the pillar of fire that we saw, and Moses is looking at this, and the people are seeing this come, and so their faith is tested. And so after they're delivered after this, they rejoice and dance, right? As we saw last week. Because God defeated death. God defeated the monsters. God defeated all that we think is true, that we believe in our own wisdom, that we create. And God is giving Israel a new opportunity, right? A new rebirth, right? Being born again through the waters, new creation, which we could connect to the immersion, right? The crossing of the sea, going in, coming out. And now they're being given the commandments, the structure at this mountain. And so they hear, let's see if you can hear this, special effects. Let's see if we can do this. The special effects, right? You can hear the thunder, the lightning, and he's in front of the presence, and the people are seeing this, and they're afraid. And he say, Moses, you go ahead, okay? And so the very important element of the mountain, top of the mountain. This is a resource that I've used to understand this, okay? It says the Paralanic archaic belief in celestial archetype of cities and temples, and even more fully attested by documents. There is we find another series of belief, right? The sacred mountain where heaven and earth meet is situated at the center of the world. Every temple or palace, by extension, every sacred city or royal residence is a sacred mountain, thus becoming the center. Right? And so here, on top of this mountain, God tells the people, purify yourself, abstain yourselves, don't cross, okay? Because I'm going to give you the commandments of how you have seen everything that I have done, how I have delivered you. And the only reason why they have been delivered from Egypt is thanks to the faith of Abraham and the covenant that God made with Abraham. So remember, the only reason why we're here is because God heard their groaning, their groaning or their oppression, and he remembered Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, which was the promise given to Abraham by faith, which was counted to him as righteousness. And today, or in this moment, because Abraham believed by faith and it was counted to him as righteousness, through that faith, God has given the commandments to the people. And the idea is that it's not supposed to be a burden. It's supposed to be something that you would do out of love, because God has been faithful and he has fulfilled his promises that he gave to our forefathers. Okay? And so, I just wanted to show you this because it's very important. Sacred mountain. Oh, why is it on top of the mountain? Why are the people on the bottom? Because in their faith, now this mountain is the center of the earth. Between heaven and earth, that's the center right there. And Moses is there. They believe that was like a portal, right? And so that's why you see that in ancient temples, there everything was on top of a mountain, and there the deity will come down. And so we will read one more thing. This is going to be a very long video, so please be patient. Hopefully you're still watching. Hopefully it makes sense. It says, Matthew chapter 5. This is the Sermon on the Mount. And Jesus speaking to the crowd, Yeshua. He says, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the gentle, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they should be called sons of God. Blessed are those who have been persecuted for the sake of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you and persecute you and falsely say all kinds of evil things against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward in heaven is great. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. And then he calls us the salt of the earth and the light that shines bright before men. And so, the connection from the mountain in Exodus and the connection of the Sermon on the Mount are the same. Just that when God gave it in the mountain, it was received as an obligation. And here Yeshua is teaching us that is out of love, by faith in the God. Our faith is in that God who can move mountains. That's when Yeshua says, if you had the faith of a mustard seed, you would tell this mountain move, and it will move. Not because you can move the mountain, because the faith in the God that could move the mountain will move the mountain. Because you have faith in him. Your faith has made you well, to the woman that was bleeding. Not my tzitzi, not my power, your faith in my Father. And so the idea of, or the point of the introduction of the Decalogues and this very long video is to solidify our faith. So by faith we receive the promise in the Torah. Okay? So that's all I got for this week. I hope you're still there. I hope you were patient. Hope you learned something new. And if you didn't, I hope you reviewed something. It's always good to review. Like I always say, I don't know anything. I just know what I know. And I share with you. So I thank you for listening. Like, subscribe, share. Have a great week. Shavua Tov. And Shabbat Shalom. Thank you.